Can a bad technical decision cost McLaren a world championship? What really happened in Oscar Piastri's car in Austin, and why did Andrea Stella get angry like never before? What looked like another triumphant weekend for McLaren in the 2025 season turned into a silent nightmare that would only explode after the checkered flag. It all started at the Circuit of the Americas, a treacherous layout known for its unpredictable bumps and elevation changes. During the main race of the United States Grand Prix, Oscar Piastri, who until then led the World Championship, showed an unusually inconsistent performance, falling below expectations with a fifth place disconnected from the level he had been showing in the previous dates. What no one in the paddock knew was that this drop in performance had a cause that would not be revealed until hours later, during a routine technical inspection in the McLaren pit. There, Andrea Stella, the brain behind the technical resurgence of the Papaya team, discovered something that unleashed his frustration as has rarely been seen in his management. Piastri's car had been competing with a ride height configuration, the height to the ground of the car outside the optimal parameters. But it was not an accidental mismatch or a marginal deviation. The car had been deliberately raised several millimeters above its ideal level, a change which, in the current era of ground effect, means completely altering the way the car generates downforce. This was not a decision made by the driver nor in consensus with his race engineer. It was a measure adopted unilaterally by the team's technical department, motivated by a specific fear: plank wear. The root of the problem dates back to Saturday's sprint race, where both McLarens collided in the first corner, leaving them out of action and, even more seriously, without the possibility of collecting race data in real conditions. This left the engineers working virtually blind to prepare the car for Sunday's main race. In this void of critical information, and remembering what happened a year earlier when both Hamilton and Leclerc were disqualified for excessive wear of the plank on this same circuit, McLaren opted for a conservative solution, raising Piastri's car to minimize the risk of excessive friction against the asphalt. From a strategic point of view, this decision may seem prudent. But in the competitive context of today's Formula One, where the margins are millimeters, it meant self-sabotaging their best attacking weapon. By preemptively raising the car, they took it out of the point of maximum aerodynamic efficiency, destroying the balance that McLaren had perfected all season with its MCL 39. This is especially significant in a car whose competitiveness was built around mastering downforce generated from the ground, thanks to an aggressive evolution that allowed the team to run lower than anyone else without compromising regulatory plank wear. The most worrying thing is that this alteration was applied without a clear communication channel between the technical department and the pilot. Piastri got into a car profoundly different from the one he had dominated at previous circuits, without knowing exactly what made it so difficult to control. And what is worse, this modification was not even contrasted with simulations beyond the theoretical predictions. It was an almost desperate act of risk management on one of the most sensitive weekends on the calendar. The race progressed, the results arrived, and the technical alarms sounded late. But when Stella reviewed the post-race data and discovered that the car's height had been adjusted without a full assessment of the impact on the aerodynamic package, her reaction was as intense as it was inevitable. The feeling was clear: they had compromised their best driver at the most important moment, not by accident, but by lack of internal cohesion and excess caution. This type of adjustment requires a perfect symbiosis between the wind tunnel, CFD simulation, and on-track data. But by elevating Piastri's car for fear of a disqualification, they took him out of that critical efficiency zone. The consequences were immediate and brutally visible in the telemetry. It was not a matter of anecdotal tense. In each high downforce sector, Piastri's car simply did not perform like Norris's. The load on the rear axle was reduced, causing the car to lose stability and support, especially in medium and high-speed curves, where ground grip is essential. Turn 11 at Coda, for example, is one of those sections that can only be taken decisively if the car exudes complete confidence at the rear. For Norris, that confidence translated into accuracy. For Piastri, it was a constant fight against oversteer, losing key tenths without even having made driving errors. What surprised analysts most was that, despite having equivalent engine configurations and fuel levels, the Australian's race pace was off by almost a second from that of his teammate. In Formula One, that's an eternity. But the problem did not end there. The performance difference was maintained throughout the weekend, indicating that it was not a progressive failure, but rather a structural condition of the car from the moment it hit the track on Sunday. The problem was not only the height of the car itself, but the impact that this change had on the entire chain of behavior of the car. The suspension geometry became unbalanced, the aerodynamic flow in the Venturi tunnels became unstable, and the car's longitudinal rake became misconfigured. The entire aeromechanical balance of the MCL39 was altered, and that meant that, although the car was legal and safe, it was no longer competitive. And this is where an even more critical dimension comes in, the psychological and strategic aspect. Oscar Piastri entered the race without knowing that his car was in a defensive configuration, designed to avoid penalties, not to win. This not only affects your immediate performance, but also your confidence in the team's decisions. Because in Formula One, a driver needs to understand every inch of the car they're driving, and if the feedback they receive doesn't match what the car is doing, that mismatch can erode even the strongest driver-engineer relationships. From a sports management approach, the damage of this error is profound. McLaren not only lost vital points in the championship fight, but also exposed a weakness that it seemed to have overcome in 2024, reactive decision-making in uncertain scenarios. And that, in a season where the margin of error is microscopic, can make the difference between being crowned champions or losing everything due to poorly measured details. Andrea Stella, a meticulous engineer with an impeccable technical background, is not known for his emotional outbursts. His leadership style, based on data, processes, and fluid communication, had been key to restoring McLaren's competitiveness in the last 2 years. However, what happened in Austin surpassed even their tolerance for operational errors. When Stella reviewed the entire weekend's telemetry and confirmed that Oscar Piastri's MCL39 was substantially altered without his direct approval or that of the team's strategic group, the frustration was total. But beyond his anger, what emerged was a deep sense of betrayal to the internal system he had built himself. One of the most sensitive points for Stella was discovering that Tom Stallard, Piastri's race engineer and a key figure in its development, was also not directly consulted about the ride height alteration. These types of decisions at McLaren usually go through a cross-validation circuit, from the responsible engineer to the simulation team, passing through aerodynamic quality control. But in this case, pressured by the sprint accident and the urgency on Sunday, a small group made the decision to act on their own, with the argument of avoiding technical sanctions. In Stella's operational culture, this represents a violation of the team's core principle. Every important decision must be shared, evaluated, and validated collectively. The immediate damage was tangible. Piastri lost valuable points in the championship fight, but the long-term damage could be even deeper. When a driver loses trust in his technical team, performance suffers. And when engineers feel that their judgment was ignored or replaced by decisions made without formal support, morale suffers. McLaren, which until then operated as a solid and coordinated block, began to show signs of fracture. Not in the form of a public scandal, but in small gestures. Colder responses on the radio, subtle disagreements in technical meetings, and an air of tension that filtered even into the post-race analyses with the media. The question now running through the paddock is not whether McLaren has the fastest car because the data continues to suggest it, but rather whether it has the operational control necessary to withstand the pressure of an entire season leading a world championship. What happened with Piastri in the United States is a brutal reminder that even leading teams can make costly internal mistakes. But beyond the technical error, what remains floating is a much deeper dilemma. Can McLaren learn from this setback without fracturing its internal structure? But it is also true that the error offers a unique opportunity to learn, adjust, and reinforce the internal structure just when there is still more than half of the championship to be played. Andrea Stella, if she manages to transform this incident into an engine for organizational improvement, can consolidate McLaren not only as the fastest team on the grid, but also as the most solid at a structural level. That is the difference between a circumstantial champion team and a dynasty like the ones Red Bull or Mercedes built in the last decade. Do you think McLaren will be able to close ranks, eliminate these mistakes, and maintain the lead until Abu Dhabi? Or do you think this crack is just the first of many that could fracture his season? Because in the end, this is what makes Formula One fascinating. Not just the roaring engines, but the human stories, the strategic decisions, the internal conflicts that define championships as much as any fastest lap. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.